The Forbidden Cave. The village of Nyamkai sat at the edge of the great oaken forest, where ancient trees whispered secrets carried by the wind. The people of Nyamkai were proud, hardworking, and deeply respectful of the land and its spirits. But among them was a boy unlike any other, Kojo. At just 10 years old, Kojo was known for his boundless curiosity and reckless spirit. While other boys his age learned to hunt, fish, or weave, Kojo spent his days exploring forbidden places, chasing shadows, and asking too many questions. The elders often warned that some things were meant to be left unknown. But warnings only made Kojo more eager to uncover secrets. And no secret in Nyamkai was greater than the Forbidden Cave. A boy who would not listen. Kojo's mischievous nature had earned him a reputation in the village. Just last season, he had climbed onto the village shrine's sacred rooftop, believing he could see the spirits of the sky if he got close enough. Instead, he fell through the thatched roof, landing in the middle of a priest offering ceremony. Another time, he had thrown a stone at a beehive, just to see how fast the bees would come out. The entire village had watched as Kojo sprinted down the death path, his screams mixing with the angry buzzing of his pursuers. His parents, Adia and Kwame, were often left apologizing for his antics. "Kojo, my son," his mother would sigh, placing a hand on his curly black hair. "Curiosity is good, but if you do not learn patience, it will bring you trouble. The world has dangers beyond what your eyes can see," his father added. "And not all of them will give you a second chance." But Kojo would only nod, pretending to listen, his mind already racing toward the next adventure. The Legend of the Forbidden Cave. One evening, Kojo sat near the village's central fire, listening as the elders spoke in hushed voices about an old legend. Long ago, before our ancestors tamed these lands, a great serpent spirit dwelled deep in the forest, the chief elder, Nana Bidioko, began. The serpent was once a guardian of the land, but when greed entered the hearts of men, they stole the serpent's heart gem, which held its power. The serpent, in its rage, nearly destroyed our ancestors. It was only through great magic and sacrifice that they managed to trap it inside a stone container, sealing it within the forbidden cave for all eternity. The flames flickered as Nana Bidioko's voice dropped lower. "That cave must never be disturbed. For if the serpent awakens, it will bring ruin upon us all." The villagers crossed their arms over their chests in a sign of respect and fear, muttering prayers to the ancestors. But Kojo's eyes gleamed with curiosity. A cave with an actual serpent spirit, he thought. Trapped for centuries. It was the greatest mystery he had ever heard. And mysteries were meant to be solved. A dangerous plan. Kojo could barely sleep that night, his mind spinning with possibilities. What does the cave look like? Is the serpent still alive after all these years? What if the elders were wrong? By the time the first rooster crowed, he had made up his mind, he was going to find the cave and see for himself. That evening, as the village settled into their nightly routines, Kojo waited. He watched as his mother and father prepared for bed. He saw the elders gathered under the baobab tree, their deep voices blending with the crackling fire. And when the moment was right, Kojo slipped away into the darkness. Into the forbidden forest. The oaken forest was unlike anything Kojo had ever seen at night. During the day, it was full of chirping birds and rustling leaves. But at night, it was silent. Eerily still. Even the moon seemed to hesitate behind the clouds, casting only faint light on the narrow path. Kojo swallowed hard, his excitement now mixed with a touch of fear. But he pressed on. With each step, the forest grew denser. The air felt thicker, charged with something ancient and unseen. And then, he saw it. A massive stone archway, half buried in vines and moss. Strange carvings covered the entrance, spirals and symbols that seemed to move under the moonlight. The Forbidden Cave. The Serpent's prison. Kojo's heartbeat pounded in his ears as he stepped inside. The air was cool, almost too cool. The deeper he went, the more the silence pressed down on him. The walls were covered in ancient markings, painted in faded reds and deep blues. He traced a finger over them, feeling the grooves of something older than time itself. And then, at the center of the cave, he found it. A stone container, sealed with a heavy lid. It was covered in layers of dust, untouched for centuries. Kojo stepped closer, his hands trembling. What if the serpent is really inside? He hesitated. Then, ignoring every instinct screaming at him to stop, he pushed the lid open. The awakening. The moment the lid shifted, a wave of energy surged through the cave. The ground trembled beneath him. The air grew thick, filled with a sudden, overwhelming heat. And then, a deafening hiss shattered the silence. Kojo staggered back, eyes wide in horror. The stone container cracked open, releasing a burst of blinding green light. Something moved inside. Something big. The hiss turned into a low, rumbling growl. A shadow slithered forward, its golden eyes piercing through the darkness. And then, the serpent awoke. The awakening of the serpent. The cave trembled violently as the lid of the stone container crashed onto the ground, sending a cloud of ancient dust swirling into the air. Kojo stumbled back, coughing, his wide eyes fixed on the shattered vessel. Something moved within it. A slow, deliberate shift. And then, from the gaping crack, a long emerald-green body began to slither forward. The air grew hot, the once cool depths of the cave turning into a humid furnace. Kojo's skin prickled with an eerie sensation, as if thousands of unseen eyes were watching him. Then, he saw them. Two golden eyes, glowing like molten fire, locking onto his own. And at that moment, Kojo realized. He had made a terrible mistake. The serpent emerges. The creature continued to rise, its body stretching taller and taller, the thick coils gliding over the broken stone with a sound like whispering sound. It was beautiful and terrifying. The scales that covered its enormous form were not just green but a shimmering blend of emerald, sapphire, and gold, shifting colors as they caught the dim light of the cave. Its head, large enough to swallow a man whole, bore intricate markings, symbols that pulsed with an unnatural glow. And when it finally spoke, its voice was not a hiss, but a rumbling growl, deep and powerful, like distant thunder before a storm. Who dares disturb my sleep? Kojo's breath caught in his throat. I. He couldn't even form the words. His legs felt glued to the floor, his chest tight with paralyzing fear. The serpent's head lowered, bringing its massive face just inches from Kojo's trembling frame. A child. A flicker of something crossed its golden eyes. Curiosity. Disdain. Hunger. Kojo forced himself to move, stumbling backward, his heart hammering against his ribs. But the serpent was too fast. In a blink, it struck forward, its coils surrounding Kojo, trapping him in a circle of shifting scales. You are not of the ones who bound me. The serpent's voice was calm, yet filled with menace. But you have freed me. It tilted its head, as if pondering what to do next. Perhaps I should thank you. Then, its eyes flashed with rage. Or perhaps I should punish you for your foolishness. The curse awakens. The ground cracked beneath Kojo's feet. The cave walls rumbled, and the ancient carvings on them began to glow with an eerie blue light, as if warning of what was coming. A wind, though there was no wind underground, began to stir, growing into a howling gale. The forest above them groaned, its trees bending unnaturally as if bowing to an unseen force. And then, the storm began. A distant thunderclap shook the night sky, rumbling so deep it felt like the very heavens were awakening. The serpent lifted its head, tasting the air, its forked tongue flicking in and out. Oh! It sighed, as if breathing in the destruction it was about to unleash. The world still remembers me. Then, with terrifying speed, it lunged toward the cave entrance. The path of destruction. Kojo snapped out of his trance, his instincts finally overriding his fear. He turned and ran. Scrambling up the rocky path, he emerged into the open air just in time to see the trees trembling, their roots ripping free from the ground as if some unseen force were pulling them apart. A gust of wind roared past him, bending the flames of the village torches in the distance. Kojo gasped for breath, glancing over his shoulder. And froze in horror. The serpent had fully emerged, its enormous body uncoiling from the cave, stretching into the night like a living shadow of destruction. With one fluid motion, it reared up, its form towering over the forest canopy. And then, it moved toward the village. The village falls into chaos. In Nyamkai, the people were already stirring. Some had been awakened by the thunder, others by the unnatural shaking of the earth beneath their feet. Then came the screams. As the first villagers caught sight of the monstrous serpent, their fear turned to panic. Children cried. Women clutched their loved ones. Men grabbed spears and torches, though deep down, they knew such weapons would do nothing against a creature of this size. And as the serpent entered the village, its mere presence changed the land itself. The crops withered, their vibrant green turning to ashen gray. The well water turned black, thick and undrinkable. The livestock fled, their instincts warning them of an ancient terror long before the humans could react. And with every movement of the serpent's tail, entire huts were crushed, sending wood and straw flying into the air. It was as if the village itself was dying. Kojo's guilt. Kojo stood at the edge of the forest, watching the destruction unfold. His entire body trembled, not just from fear, but from guilt. This is my fault. I woke the serpent. I brought this curse upon my people. He clenched his fist, his mind racing. He had to fix this. Somehow, some way, he had to stop the serpent before it destroyed everything. But how? The elders had warned that the serpent was unstoppable, that the only reason it had been contained was because of the serpent's heart gem. But that gem was gone. Or was it? Kojo's heart pounded with sudden realization. If the serpent was sealed away once, there must be a way to do it again. He took a deep breath, pushing down his fear. Then, he turned on his heel and ran, not away from the village, but toward the only person who might know the answer. The old sage, Baba Komo, the village's rat and the old sage. The once peaceful village of Nyamkai had turned into a land of terror and destruction. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, they revealed a night of devastation. Fields that had once been golden with crops were reduced to dust, trampled under the weight of an enraged serpent. The village well, the source of life for Nyamkai, had turned black and foul-smelling, as if the very essence of the land had been poisoned. And in the village square, a single sound echoed louder than the wind. The wails of the people. The village in chaos. The gods have forsaken us. We are cursed. Who has brought this disaster upon us? The villagers cried out in anguish, huddled in small groups, some gathering what little remained of their homes, others desperately searching for missing family members. Amid the wreckage, Chief Osei, the oldest and most respected elder of Nyamkai, stood tall despite the sorrow in his eyes. His long grey beard was dusted with ash, and his ceremonial red and gold robe was torn from the chaos. But his voice was strong when he spoke. This disaster did not come upon us by accident. His deep voice carried over the crowd. Someone disturbed the forbidden cave. Silence fell. The people turned to one another, whispers spreading through the crowd. Who would be so foolish? Who has doomed us all? And then, a small voice cut through the murmurs. It was Kojo. The revelation. The crowd parted as a trembling young boy, Kojo's childhood friend, Kwesi, stepped forward. His face was pale with fear, but his voice was steady. I saw him leave last night. He went into the forest, toward the forbidden cave. Gasps rippled through the villagers. Eyes turned toward Kojo's family hut, where Adia, his mother, stood frozen in horror. No. She whispered, her hands covering her mouth. Then, from the back of the crowd, a familiar figure stumbled forward. Kojo. His clothes were torn, his face streaked with dirt, his eyes wide with exhaustion and fear. He had been running from the monster he had set free. And now, he had nowhere left to run. The people's rage. You did this? An elderly woman, whose heart had been crushed in the serpent's rampage, pointed a shaking finger at him. You brought this upon us. A murmur turned into a roar of anger. He should be banished. No, he should be sacrificed to the serpent. It is the only way to end this curse. Kojo stumbled back, his chest tightening. He had never been afraid of the village before. But now, he saw hatred in their eyes. A mother's plea. Please. Adia pushed through the crowd, kneeling before Chief Ose. He is just a child. He did not mean to bring harm. Tears streaked her face as she turned to the people. Have you all forgotten? He is one of us. He is our son, our brother. Would you turn against him so easily? The crowd hesitated, but their anger was not easily quelled. Chief Ose's expression was unreadable. Then, he raised his hand, and silence fell again. Kojo. His voice was grave. You have committed a great sin against the village. But I do not believe that sacrificing a child is the answer. He turned to the people. But he must fix what he has broken. A murmur of agreement spread through the crowd. Then, the chief's gaze returned to Kojo. You will go. You will find a way to stop the serpent. Or you will never return. Kojo's heart pounded in his chest. But I don't know how. The chief's dark eyes held no mercy. Then you must find someone who does. The search for Bobakomo. Kojo had no choice but to run. With nothing but the clothes on his back, he fled into the forest, leaving behind the only home he had ever known. He did not stop, not when his feet burned, not when the tears blurred his vision. The village was no longer safe for him. The only hope left was to find Bobakomo, the old sage who lived deep within the oaken forest. Bobakomo, the keeper of lost knowledge. Bobakomo, the one who knew the secrets of the old world. And the only man who might know how to stop Nzuri. The old sage's hut. Kojo's legs ached, his stomach growled with hunger, but he pushed forward, deeper into the ancient woods. The trees grew thicker, the light dimmer, until he stumbled upon a small, twisted path, barely visible beneath the overgrown vines. And there, at the very end, a hut stood. Unlike the huts of Naimkai, this one was covered in strange markings, its walls adorned with hanging herbs, bones, and ancient charms. The door was slightly ajar, revealing the flickering glow of a fire inside. Kojo took a deep breath and stepped forward. He knocked once. Twice. The door creaked open on its own. And inside, sitting before a fire pit filled with blue flames, was Bobakomo. The sage's words. The old man's skin was dark as midnight, his white beard long and braided with beads of gold. His eyes, clouded with wisdom, stared into the flames, as if he had been waiting. You are late, child, Bobakomo said without looking up. Kojo swallowed, his heart pounding in his chest. You know why I'm here. The old sage finally turned to him, his grey eyes piercing. The air reeks of the serpent's anger. Kojo fell to his knees, desperation pouring out of him. Please, Boba. I made a mistake. The village is in danger. Nzuri is loose, and I don't know how to stop it. The old man studied him for a long moment. Then, he sighed and tossed a handful of crushed leaves into the fire, sending a burst of blue smoke into the air. There is only one way. Kojo's breath caught in his throat. What is it? Baba Komo's voice lowered, like the whisper of the wind through the trees. Nzuri's rage can only be calmed by returning what was taken. The serpent's heart gem. Kojo's eyes widened. The one from the legend. Baba Komo nodded. It was lost long ago, hidden beyond the twin rivers of the cursed land. The fire flickered, casting eerie shadows across the room. The journey is full of trials, Baba Komo warned. And if you fail, the serpents will never stop. Kojo's fist clenched. The fate of his home, his family, his people. It all rested on him now. He had made this mistake. And he would fix it. No matter what. The quest for the serpent's heart gem. The morning sun barely pierced through the thick canopy of the oaken forest, casting long shadows over the damp, moss-covered ground. Kojo stood at the entrance of the cursed lands, his fist clenched, his heart pounding with determination and fear. No man dares to tread here, Baba Komo had warned. But I am not just any man, Kojo told himself. He had awakened a great disaster, and he alone would set things right. Taking a deep breath, he stepped into the unknown. The twin rivers of the cursed land. After hours of trekking, Kojo arrived at the first great obstacle, the twin rivers. The waters were black as ink, churning and bubbling like something alive. A narrow, broken bridge stretched over the first river, but the second river had no bridge at all, only swirling rapids that looked as if they could swallow the sun itself. As he approached the river's edge, a deep voice echoed through the air. Who dares cross the sacred waters? Kojo froze. From the mist rising of the river, two figures materialized, the river spirits. One was a tall, slender woman with skin like moonlight and hair that flowed like water itself. The other was a towering man, his eyes dark as the depths, his body woven from the currents of the river. They floated above the waters, their gaze piercing through Kojo's soul. To pass these waters, the female spirit whispered, you must answer our riddle. Fail, and you will be swallowed by the river forever. Kojo swallowed hard and nodded. Ask your riddle, he said. The male spirit stepped forward, his voice deep as thunder. I have no mouth, yet I speak. I have no eyes, yet I see. I have no body, yet I move the world. What am I? Kojo's mind raced. No mouth, but it speaks. No eyes, but it sees. No body, yet it moves everything. Then, realization struck. The wind, he exclaimed. A moment of silence. Then, the spirit smiled. You have answered well, the female spirit said, raising her hands. A golden path of stepping stones emerged across the second river, glowing with soft light. Go forth, seeker of redemption. But beware, the forest ahead is filled with those who wish to see you fail. Kojo bowed in gratitude before hurrying across the river, his heart beating faster with each step. The forest of shadows. As soon as Kojo stepped into the sacred forest, an unnatural coldness swept over him. The air grew thick, the trees twisted and stretched, their branches forming dark, clawing fingers. A low whispering began, soft at first, then growing into an eerie chorus of voices. You will fail. You are not strong enough. Turn back, Kojo. His own voice echoed among them. You are a disgrace to your village. You have doomed your people. Kojo gritted his teeth, pushing forward. But then, the shadows took shape. Figures stepped from the darkness. His father, his mother, his friends, the village elders, all staring at him with hatred. You brought this curse upon us, his father's voice boomed. You are nothing but a foolish boy, the chief elder sneered. Kojo froze, his breath coming in short gasps. The shadows closed in, their forms blurring, twisting. "It's not real," he whispered. The figures morphed, turning into monstrous black-eyed spirits, their voices becoming sharp hisses. Kojo clenched his fist. "You are not real," he shouted, his voice echoing through the forest. The moment he spoke his truth, the shadows screamed and melted away like mist in the sun. The forest fell silent once more. And ahead, bathed in a soft golden glow, lay the entrance to the underground temple. The temple of the Serpent's heart. Kojo descended the ancient stone steps, his footsteps echoing in the vast underground chamber. The walls were covered in serpent carvings, their golden eyes glowing dimly. And at the center, on a raised stone altar, sat the Serpent's heart gem. It was smaller than he expected, only the size of a man's fist, but it pulsed with an inner fire, as if alive. Kojo approached cautiously, his fingers trembling as he reached out. The moment he touched the gem, the entire temple began to shake. The walls cracked, dust poured from the ceiling, and the floor beneath him began to split apart. "The temple is collapsing," Kojo realized. Gripping the gem tightly, he turned and ran, leaping over the widening cracks in the stone. Behind him, the serpent carvings came to life, their eyes flashing, their stone bodies twisting as if trying to trap him inside. The entrance was closing. Kojo pushed forward, his legs burning, his heart hammering. And at the last moment, he dived through the collapsing doorway, rolling onto the dirt outside. Behind him, the temple entrance caved in, sealing the underground chamber forever. Kojo lay there, panting, the serpent's heart gem clutched tightly to his chest. He had done it. But now, he had to get back to the village. Before it was too late, the serpent's judgment. The village of Nyamkai was no longer the thriving home Kojo had once known. It was a graveyard of ash and ruin. The once golden fields lay in waste, trampled under the weight of the serpent's massive claws. The village well had dried up, its sacred waters turned to thick black sludge. Houses had collapsed, their charred remains smoldering from the serpent's wrath. Nzuri, the great emerald serpent, now coiled at the center of the village, its golden eyes burning as it watched the people of Nyamkai with something far worse than anger and judgment. It had waited long enough. Now, it demanded a sacrifice. The people's desperation. Great Serpent. Chief Ose stepped forward, his aged face streaked with soot and sorrow. "You have taken our land, our homes, our crops. What more do you want?" Nzuri's massive head lowered, its tongue flickering as it gazed at the trembling villagers. "The debt of betrayal is not yet paid," it hissed. The wind howled, carrying its voice like a curse upon the air. "Your ancestors stole my heart. And now, to restore balance, I will take what was stolen." The people shrank back, terrified. "What do you mean?" the chief demanded. The serpent's golden eyes gleamed. Alive. The silence was deafening. And then, a single whisper passed through the crowd. "Kojo." All eyes turned to the boy. Kojo, who had caused this disaster. Kojo, who had unleashed the beast. The rage of the villagers, buried beneath their fear, now rose to the surface. It was his doing. Let him pay the price. Give him to the serpent. Kojo's last stand. Kojo stood frozen, his chest tight with fear. He knew this would happen. He had felt the hatred growing since the moment he returned. And now, as the men of the village seized him, dragging him toward the serpent, he knew. If he didn't act now, it would be too late. "Stop!" Kojo shouted, his voice cracking through the chaos. But the elders ignored him, their faces cold. "We must do what is necessary," one of them muttered. They forced Kojo to his knees before Nzuri, preparing for the final act. Nzuri's fanned mouth opened, its hot breath washing over Kojo's face. The boy braced himself. Then he remembered. The gem in his hand. His only chance. With all his strength, Kojo ripped free from the elder's grasp and held the glowing gem high. Stop. I have what you seek. The entire village gasped. And Nzuri froze. The serpent's choice. The moment Nzuri saw the gem, its entire body tensed, as if caught between two forces. Its golden eyes darkened, shifting with emotions too old to name. It was not just a stone. It was its heart. Its soul. Kojo took a shaking breath. This was stolen from you, he said, his voice steady. But it was not me who stole it. The serpent hissed, its coils tightening. And yet it was you who freed me. The ground rumbled beneath them, but Kojo did not move. I made a mistake, he admitted. But I can make it right. He stepped forward, his hands trembling but firm. Take the gem. Take back what was yours. But in return, you must promise peace. The serpent's great body stilled. The village held its breath. And then Nzuri's gaze softened. A moment passed, then two. Then, slowly, the great serpent lowered its head. The curse is lifted. Kojo placed the gem before Nzuri. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the ground pulsed with ancient energy. The serpent's massive form began to glow, the light wrapping around it like a second skin. Nzuri let out a deep, rumbling sigh, a sound of relief, not anger. The curse was breaking. The sky, once grey and storming, turned a brilliant blue. The blackened crops began to sprout new life. The well water shimmered back to crystal clarity. The village, on the brink of ruin, was healing. Nzuri lifted its head, its golden eyes meeting Kojo's one last time. You have returned what was stolen. And so, the balance is restored. Then, with a final mighty coil, Nzuri slithered back into the depths of the forest, disappearing into legend once more. The serpent's secret and the return of balance. The earth trembled as Nzuri, the great serpent, lifted its massive head, its golden eyes reflecting the morning light. The village of Nyamkai, still standing in the aftermath of destruction, held its breath. The once wrathful beast, who had nearly turned their home to ashes, now stared at the serpent's heart gem, pulsing with an ancient energy. A moment passed. Then another. Then, for the first time, Nzuri spoke, not in anger, not in vengeance, but with a voice that carried the weight of centuries. Nzuri's truth. You believe me to be a monster, the serpent's voice reverberated through the village, deep and ancient. The villagers shrank back, fear still lingering in their eyes. But I was not always what you see before you. Nzuri's coils shifted, and suddenly, the air was filled with visions. Shimmering images of the past, floating like mist. The people of Nyamkai gasped as they saw their village, not in ruin, but as it had been long ago, when the land was still young. They saw a mighty guardian, a serpent of light, coiled around the rivers and fields, protecting the land and blessing the harvest. They saw a golden age, when the waters flowed freely, the crops never withered, and the people lived in harmony with the spirits. But then, the vision darkened. They saw greedy rulers, men drunk with power, approaching Nzuri's sacred resting place. They saw them whispering amongst themselves, speaking of riches and dominion. And then, they saw the betrayal. Nzuri's heart gem, the source of its divine energy, was ripped away. The serpent let out a cry of anguish, its body convulsing, its form darkening as it was stripped of its light. And so, the protector became the cursed. The vision faded, leaving only silence. The transformation. Nzuri turned its gaze upon Kojo, who still held the serpent's heart gem in his trembling hands. You have done what your ancestors could not, the serpent murmured. Kojo stepped forward, his voice steady. it was never mine to keep. With great care, he placed the gem at the base of the serpent's massive coils. The moment the gem touched the ground, a brilliant golden light exploded outward, sending ripples of energy through the village. Nzuri shuddered, its scales changing before their very eyes. The once darkened emerald body now shimmered with radiant gold, like the first light of dawn. Its eyes softened, no longer burning with rage, but glowing with wisdom. The wind stilled. The earth quieted. Nzuri, once a beast of destruction, had returned to its divine form. The serpent's departure. The village stood in awe as Nzuri, now graceful and ethereal, lifted its head to the sky. The balance is restored. The great serpent began to slither away, its massive form gliding through the ruined fields, but wherever it passed, life returned. The blackened crops sprouted anew, green and lush. The wells, once dry, filled again with crystal-clear water. The trees that had fallen stood tall once more, their leaves whispering in the wind. The village, which had been on the brink of ruin, was healing. Nzuri reached the edge of the sacred forest and paused. Turning its head one last time, its golden eyes met Kojo's. You have proven that even the reckless can learn. Even the lost can find their way. Your journey does not end here, young one. One day, I will return, not as your destroyer, but as your guardian once more. With that, the serpent disappeared into the ancient woods, vanishing into legend. The village of Nyamkai would never see it again. Or so they thought. A new beginning. As the dust settled, the villagers turned to Kojo. The same boy they had once called a fool, the same boy they had nearly sacrificed, now stood before them as their savior. Chief Ose, silent for a long moment, finally spoke. You have done what no one else could, he said, his voice filled with both regret and admiration. You brought destruction, but you also brought salvation. Kojo, once seen as a troublemaker, was now a hero. The village bowed their heads in gratitude, a sign of respect that had never been given to him before. And for the first time in his life, Kojo did not feel small. He felt worthy. The lesson of the serpent. That night, as the village began rebuilding, Kojo sat at the edge of the forest, staring at the place where Nzuri had disappeared. His mother, Adia, placed a hand on his shoulder. You saved us, she whispered. Kojo shook his head. I almost destroyed us. His mother smiled, brushing a curl from his forehead. Curiosity can be dangerous, she said. But with wisdom, even the greatest mistakes can be undone. Kojo smiled, holding those words close to his heart. From that day on, he was no longer just the reckless boy of Nyamkai. He was the boy who had faced a legend and lived to tell the tale. The Whispering Forest. Years passed. Nyamkai thrived once more, its people never forgetting the lesson of the serpent. But sometimes, on certain moonlit nights, when the wind was just right, if one listened closely, they could hear the soft hiss of a serpent in the wind. And those who were brave enough to venture near the edge of the sacred forest swore they saw two golden eyes watching over them, filled not with anger, but with wisdom. The end.